The United States and Brazil, the largest economies in North and South America, appear headed for a full-blown trade war. Plus, the U.S. and Colombia recall their top diplomats in an acceleration of worsening ties there. Hi, everyone. I'm Sean Caleb, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Welcome, everyone. Colombia was, until recently, one of the United States' closest partners in Latin America before bilateral relations sharply deteriorated. Now, earlier this month, prosecutors opened an investigation into an alleged plot to overthrow President Gustavo Petro with the help of Colombian and American politicians. We'll have more on that a bit later in the program. But we're going to begin with another hot spot, and that is the growing tension between the U.S. and Brazil. U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to impose a 50% tariff on all Brazilian products that come into the United States, effective August 1. The announcement comes amid rising political tensions in the shadow of recent BRICS summit in Brazil and Trump's call for a halt to the trial of former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. CGTN's Lucrecia Franco has more in this report.
On Wednesday, July 9th, U.S. President Donald Trump confirmed he would unilaterally apply steep tariffs against countries of his choosing, singling out Brazil as a target.
Brazil, as an example, has been not good to us, not good at all.
Later in a text, Trump announced he would apply a 50% levy on products coming from Brazil. Contrary to his earlier claim that tariffs would be a form of economic reciprocity, Trump inferred that he was punishing Brazil for what he called a witch hunt against former far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro, along with 7 others, is standing trial on charges of allegedly plotting a coup against President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva that involved an attack on the Brazil Congress in January 2022. Tensions between Brazil and the U.S. were already on the rise. At the closing of the BRICS summit on Monday, Lula criticized what he called U.S. economic intimidation tactics.
The world has changed. It doesn't want emperors anymore. We are sovereign nations. If he thinks he can apply tariffs, other countries have the right to apply tariffs too.
The new 50% tariff marks a sharp jump from the 10% Trump initially announced on April 2nd. But Brazil is better positioned to absorb the blow than countries such as Mexico and Canada because, according to official data, only 12% of Brazil's exports go to the U.S., principally in the form of commodities such as oil, orange juice, coffee, and steel. Economist Manuel Tejin says the punitive tariff is particularly baffling considering the actual balance of trade.
You shouldn't use economic policies for political reasons. It's completely insane. It's technically awful. So it's a disaster for 2 countries that have been friends for the past, 150 years.
According to official data, the U.S. ran a $7.4 billion trade surplus with Brazil in 2024.
Lucrecia Franco, CGTN, Rio de Janeiro.
And that gives us a lot to talk about. Let's go straight to our panel. Benjamin Norton is the founder and editor-in-chief of the Geopolitical Economy Report. Michael Schifter is a senior fellow with the Inter-American Dialogue, also with us. Paulo Velasco, he is an international politics professor at Rio de Janeiro State University. And Ottaviano Canuto served as a vice president for the World Bank. He is currently a senior fellow with the Policy Center for the New South. And Ottaviano, I want to start with you. I thought it was a very excellent setup package we had from Lucrecia right there, and she really did point out that Brazil and the United States have this rich history that goes back such a long time, and the trade that has been going on between the 2 nations has always been beneficial. Donald Trump clearly values sending out more than he imports, and that's one thing that the U.S. does have going on with Brazil. So enlighten us. What is behind all of what is going on between the U.S. and Brazil right now?
Well, it's a pleasure to be here again. The fact is that Brazil has been a special case. taking into account the fact that even though Brazil has had negative trade balance with the U.S., and that's why at the time of the Liberation Day on the reciprocal tariffs, Brazil only got the 10%. The fact of the matter is that the 50% now included in Mr. Trump's letter is the highest among all others. See, one may note a certain pattern, trade-related, in the negotiations that Mr. Trump has had with other countries. Hiking tariffs, UK, minimum 10%, with China, a higher level of tariff rates than before, with Vietnam as well, including the surtaxes on the transshipment and so on, and Indonesia. They are all, let's say, dealing with tariffs and trade. The uniqueness in the case of Brazil is that Mr. Trump's letter referred mainly to non-economic questions, referred to Mr. Bolsonaro's process in Brazil, as well as the issue between the Supreme Court, the Brazilian Supreme Court, and the tech companies, and so on. So it's hard to foresee what is the path of any negotiation between the two sides. And even though Brazil's dependence on the U.S. market is relatively lower than in the other cases that were quoted, but still, the 50% of tariffs may harm the growth of Brazil in something close to 0.9%.
Let's also pick up on this theory that the United States has, in many ways, turned its back on Latin America over the past several decades. And clearly, we saw the BRICS summit wind up down there. That has to have the attention of the United States, because if you look at the letters that make up BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to what degree do you think that the U.S. could be pushing back because it feels that it is now on the outside looking in?
Well, the fact is that, as it has already been very much discussed here in Washington, if you have on the one side China coming with investments and offering opportunities,
right,
the poster by the U.S. should be exactly in offering alternatives, not simply punishment and aggressivity. That undermines the influence of the brother up north on the region. There has to have carrots, not only sticks.
Yeah. Paulo, if I can turn to you now, because the Trump administration has initiated its own trade investigation of Brazil, and that certainly has raised eyebrows and posed a lot of questions as well, looking into what it considers Brazil's attacks on U.S. social media entities. But without question, the Trump administration has focused its efforts on Bolsonaro as well. Trump calling it, quote, a witch hunt. I want you to hear what was said about that.
President Bolsonaro is not a dishonest man. He loves the people of Brazil. He fought hard for the people of Brazil. He negotiated trade deals against me for the people of Brazil, and he was very tough. And he was tough because he wanted to do a good deal for his country. He was not a dishonest man. And I believe it's a witch hunt, and it shouldn't be happening.
Trump loves to use the words witch hunts, and he loves the fact that Bolsonaro was widely called Trump of the tropics. I want you to weigh in on this, Paulo, if you can, because Bolsonaro could face 43 years in prison if convicted.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I think that what we are witnessing now is that the United States and Donald Trump is trying to interfere in Brazilian domestic politics. And that's quite bizarre. Now, when you consider Brazil as a sovereign state, we have always had a very good relation with the United States. We have a strategic dialogue with the United States. So it doesn't make any sense to witness an American president trying to interfere and to push some kind of amnesty in favor of Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro actually is facing very severe accusations here related to an attempt of coup d'etat in Brazil 2 years ago. So I think that something that is related just to Brazilian justice, and the United States has nothing to do with that. So when we see a foreign president trying to interfere in domestic politics and in our justice, that's something very, very bizarre. And it can affect actually our relations to the United States. And that's why we can consider that maybe for the last 50 years, we are going through the worst moment in the relation between Brazil and Washington. And what's maybe even more a source of concern here is that Brazil it's quite impossible for us to offer anything to the United States. We cannot give an amnesty to Jair Bolsonaro. We have a trade deficit with the United States. So what can we do in order to improve our relations in this moment? You know, we have nothing to do. So it's something that for us is a source of big concern.
Yeah, and Michael, picking up on what Paulo was talking about, interfering in politics in another country. The U.S. does have a history of doing this in a clandestine fashion, but this is right out in the open, in their face. And I want to, Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman went on to say that what is going on by the Trump administration is, one, grotesquely illegal, and secondly, just because you don't like the judicial elements of one country is not a reason to punish them in an economic fashion. And clearly, current President Lula da Silva has had some very strong feelings about this. I want to play you a quick soundbite from what he's had to say about what Trump has been doing in terms of rattling the economic saber.
A president of a country the size of the United States to go around threatening the world on the internet, it's not right. He needs to understand the world has changed, you know. We don't want an emperor. We are sovereign nations. If he thinks they can impose tariffs on countries, they also have the right to do the same. This country has laws, this country has rules, and this country has an owner, the Brazilian people. So let him mind his own business, not ours.
And Michael, I need to point out that he has been very clear, Lula da Silva, that Brazil will respond in kind with its own tariffs if the U.S. goes through what it wants to do by August 1. Your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. This is new. What's not new is U.S. interventionism and meddling in Latin America. But it's usually done to protect certain economic or security interests. This is very, very different. This is unilateralism, and it's highly personalistic. It's President Trump because he doesn't like somebody. And he doesn't like the judges in Brazil. He doesn't like Lula da Silva. He doesn't like other leaders. We saw this with Trudeau. This is a sharp departure, and it's very dangerous. And, and I think it has very severe implications for U.S. relations with Latin America. As President Trump said the other day regarding this, he says, I'm doing it because I can. Yeah. And it's because he has this affinity with Bolsonaro, both of them portraying themselves as victims of an unjust justice system and being persecuted. And so he's using the power of the United States to intervene in this way, which of course is detrimental not only to Brazil, but also to the United States. This is another example of a self-inflicted wound that we've seen from this administration from the outset since January.
Benjamin, I want to thank you for your patience. I'm sorry it took so long to get to you, but I'm curious. I'd like to get you to A, weigh in on this, and secondly, your reaction to what the president of Brazil says right now, that if indeed Trump does try to punish Brazil with these tariffs on August 1, that country will respond in kind. And think about this long, close relationship that these two nations have had. Basically, the U.S. has viewed Brazil as being in its backyard.
Well, the reason that this is possible is because now China is Brazil's largest trading partner, and Brazilian trade with the U.S. is less and less important. So this demonstrates this multipolar world we're in, that Lula has been actually an architect of, as one of the founders of BRICS back in 2009, when it was still BRIC at the time. And Lula has constantly emphasized that he must defend the sovereignty of Brazil against U.S. meddling. This didn't start under Trump. When Lula was in power the first time and his successor Dilma was in power, they accused the U.S. of being behind political coups in 2016, the politically motivated impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. And then in 2018, we saw that Lula was leading in the polls, and he was imprisoned on what was later acknowledged to be false charges of corruption. The Supreme Court of Brazil later cleared his record entirely, and the UN Human Rights Committee investigated and said that his civil rights had been violated, that it was a politically motivated case. This is why the Workers' Party in Brazil refers to this as a coup, what happened previously, which is what led Bolsonaro to come to power. And then Bolsonaro, he attempted a military coup. It wasn't very successful, but he attempted one. And we should keep in mind that it was inspired by what Trump supporters did on January 6th, 2021. Trump lost the presidential election. His supporters attempted a coup. They stormed the Capitol. And then Bolsonaro's supporters did the exact same thing 2 years later on January 8th of 2023. And then Bolsonaro later admitted in court that he met with military leaders and asked for their support to prevent Lula, who won the elections, from taking power. So Trump, of course, erases all of that context. Right. And he claims this is a witch hunt. This is not a witch hunt. In every single country on earth, it's illegal to try to carry out a coup after you lose an election. And that's exactly what Bolsonaro did. And Trump is using tariffs as a political tool of interference on behalf of his political ally.
Paulo, I want you to pick up on that as well, because Bolsonaro has been vocal, even though considering his position. And he said if he had the ability just to sit down and talk with Donald Trump, that they would be able to work this out. There seems like there's a whole lot wrong with what he's saying right there.
Yeah, actually it is. When we consider Brazilian right or far-right leaders, political leaders, not only Bolsonaro, but many others, for instance, the governor of São Paulo, Tarcísio, they all try to celebrate the tariffs that came from the U.S. Last week, saying that it's quite easy for Brazil to get over that. It's just to give a kind of amnesty to Bolsonaro, stop the investigation through the Supreme Court and stuff. So what we are witnessing here in Brazil is the far-right leaders here, Bolsonaro, the most important one, but many others, trying to coordinate their actions with President Donald Trump, pushed maybe by the son of Bolsonaro that's living in the U.S. He's a federal deputy here in Brazil, a congressman, but he's in the U.S. by the moment, and he has very close relations to Trump. And maybe this is the reason for what we are witnessing here in Brazil. So the far-right leaders here and the political parties in Brazil coordinate with Bolsonaro, with Donald Trump, trying to interfere in our domestic politics. Okay. It's something very strange because this affects our democracy, our sovereignty, and above all, our relations to the U.S. We have more than 200 years relations now, a very good relations, strategic dialogue, and all this is put at stake by the moment because of this kind of political movement led by Bolsonaro and his family and his son and everyone related to the family in order to stop the investigations and the move of the justice, the Supreme Court, in order to maybe get Bolsonaro to trial because of the 8th January 2023 coup attempt here. So it's something that we have to bear in mind. It's quite bizarre. Related to the U.S.-Brazil relations.
Okay, I'm going to move on now. We've talked about Brazil quite a bit. Ottaviano, if I can talk to you a bit about Colombia and what is going on in that nation. Because we've heard in this program, there's a history, of course, with the United States meddling in Latin American affairs, and there are allegations are out there now. The Trump administration recalling its top diplomat after President Gustavo Petro alleged that a U.S.-linked coup plot involving his foreign minister. Talk a bit more about that and also the tensions that have been growing down there because of BRICS.
The fact of the matter is that, of course, as you aptly described in the beginning, Colombia has been a strong ally. Colombia is one of the countries with a free trade agreement with the United States. The support that Colombia received with respect to the war against drugs and so on, and a long history. See, by coincidence, when I was a member of the board of the World Bank, I represented 9 countries, including Brazil and Colombia. I know extremely well the proximity. Now, Petro has been putting the country into a slightly different, it doesn't surprise me, his wavering now with respect to the BRICS. It's important to keep in mind that when it comes to the new development bank and the financial institutions created by the BRICS, which is the gateway probably for Colombia to get in. There is no opposition. There is more complementarity with the tradition of the existing international financial institutions than a confrontation. That's the fact. And Colombia seems to be sending the signal that it wants to enjoy the eventual benefits from the cooperation that takes place within BRICS.
Yeah.
We should keep in sight that BRICS has not been, since the origin, any sort of a political consultation. Of course, some countries, Russia tries to make it that way, but the fact of the matter is an economic partnership. And the bare fruits, more visibly, are the new development bank and the arrangement of sharing currencies and so on. And apparently, Colombia wants to join this. Mr. Trump has overstated the risks of this evolution of the BRICS.
I kind of want to continue to talk about the conflict between these two nations, but Michael, turning to you, let's talk a bit about Colombia's history, because there's another challenge, for lack of a better word, facing the country right now, with the Trump administration potentially decertifying the country in its fight against drugs. The results, are going to be very significant. I want you to hear just a bit of what people are saying about that right now.
The problem is not 3 young gang members doing their shady business in New York. The problem is the multinational criminal organizations that control the traffic of arms, women, children, organs, cocaine, fentanyl, the dark web. If he really wants to confront them, he has a president in me who wants to help him, even if this costs my life and my family.
And let's think back on the way things were in the 80s and the 90s. There have been significant progress made. Your concerns about what this could not only do to the relationship between these two nations, but also perhaps have a role in destabilizing that entire region.
Well, the relationship is at a low point, and it wasn't exactly high in the last administration, the last Colombian administration, but it's really with a low point with Petro. It's no surprise, knowing Petro's leadership style and Trump's leadership style, there was inevitable clash that was coming. It was the first crisis with Latin America in the Trump administration on January 26th, less than a week after he took office, when Petro complained about the way deportees were treated, looking at what happened in Brazil, and then he decided not to accept deportation. Trump threatened with shutting off visas and imposing tariffs. Then they backed off. And now there's another crisis with both ambassadors, as you say. And now with decertification decision coming up in September, most people here in Washington believe that they will be decertified. What's unclear is what will be the sanctions that will accompany that decision. But it's important to stress at this point, Sean, both in Colombia and Brazil, that both countries have elections in 2026. And Gustavo Petro is very, very good at using these kinds of attacks from Trump and standing up to Trump to shore up his own political capital, and he'll have a candidate in the election next year. And I think one has to consider how this relates to the electoral calendar. In less than 10 months, there'll be elections that are very, very important. So he could really get a huge boost from this, and he's looking forward, I think, to the decertification decision, even though it will have a negative impact on Colombia, because electorally it could be beneficial.
And Benjamin, picking up on that, because Trump, the argument is that he tends to take a look at relationships and politics like a business deal, and history shows that just doesn't work. And if you look at what happened to USAID here in the United States and the ripple effect, obviously, it is having on all the nations that it did benefit, and Colombia was one of those countries that really benefited to the tune of about $3.9 billion. Talk about the fact that the Trump administration has cut off this funding. What is it doing to that population? And we have seen time and time again that it's really the people at the very lowest of this safety net that are being punished the most.
This is for me.
Yes.
Well, I think we should keep in mind that this is not just about the 2026 elections. A big part of this is also about the debate over the war on drugs. It clearly failed. We saw a similar political controversy in Mexico when President Andrés Manuel López Obrador also abandoned the violent approach, the war on drugs, to try to crack down on the drug issue in Mexico. And Gustavo Petro has done exactly the same in Colombia. Whereas previously, the approach was Plan Colombia. The U.S. flooded Colombia with military equipment and military aid and tried to crush drug networks violently. And there was also a lot of corruption involved. We know, for instance, the horrible false positive scandal in Colombia, where the Colombian military killed innocent civilians and then dressed them up in the uniforms of guerrillas, claiming that they had been guerrillas. So in the case of Colombia, Plan Colombia was obviously a disaster. It was a failure. So Petro has been trying to take a different path. Like in Mexico, this is obviously a complex issue dealing with drug trafficking, and something that both Colombia and Mexico have emphasized is that if they need to deal with this problem, if they want to actually solve it, they need to deal not only with the supply issue, but also with the demand issue. And they constantly point out that the U.S. also has to take significant steps, because it's the U.S. and Europe that are the largest consumers of these drugs that are produced in Latin America. So when we get back to USAID, we should keep in mind that in Latin America, USAID is often seen as a very political organization because it has been linked to different coup attempts and different opposition organizations that are political. So I think the issue of USAID in Colombia is also deeply linked to Plan Colombia and the war on drugs. So I think what we're seeing here is a complete new direction in Latin America that seeks to deal with the root causes of these issues and not just, flood the region with military aid, which has been the U.S. approach for decades.
Yeah, and indeed. And Paulo, we have about 45 seconds, but I really want you to kind of weigh in really quickly on if you see the harm in trumpeting this America First policy. What does it do to Latin America and the real downside of all of this?
Well, I think that we are going through the worst moment in the relationship between the U.S. and Latin America in maybe the last 40 or 50 years. And we are just in the beginning of Donald Trump administration now. It will probably cause the countries in the region will try to get close and close to other partners, trying to find some alternatives to the U.S., for instance, China, other Asian states. And what we are witnessing is not simply a trade war, but a kind of interference, foreign interference in our domestic politics in Colombia, in Brazil, in many other states. And this may affect our democracy. We saw this in the 50s, in the 60s.
Indeed, Paulo, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. We're out of time. I'm sorry I have to cut you off. It's been a wonderful discussion, and we could go on and on this for some time. Thank you all for your time and your comments. And that does it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Sean Caleb here in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for watching.